all they have is pugs. They currently have 3 right now. They've had up to like 7 at one time, which is too much.
Okay,
And anytime we see a pug walking,
I'm gonna call this meeting of the Planning Commission to order.
Yeah, they've had up to like 7 at one time, which is too much.
This is the Lexington Planning Commission.
And anytime we
Sorry.
see a pug walking.
I'm gonna call this meeting
We
of
did
the
that
Planning Commission to order.
Been there, done that. Yeah. They've had up to like 7 at one time, which is
This is the Lexington Planning Commission. Sorry, repeat. I'm gonna call this meeting.
We did that
Planning Commission to order.
Been there, done. Betty, we're having some technical difficulties. Good now. Are we good now?
Is it still recording?
Still recording, yeah.
Okay. So this is the Lexington Planning Commission, the September 26, 2024 meeting, and I will have now called this to order. The first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the September 12th, 2024 meeting. Do we have any comments? They are lovely and comprehensive. Anything that needs to be changed, added, amended?
No, I think they're excellent as usual, and I move to accept the minutes as presented.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor
Aye.
Aye.
and opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you very much. We will move on to item 4 on the agenda, citizens' comments on matters that are not on the agenda. So if there's anybody in the audience who would like to come up and speak on an item that is not on the agenda, I welcome you to do that now. And since we don't have a rush to the stand, I will close that section and open up new business. The first item under new business is a presentation on payments to the city of Lexington from Washington and Lee University. And if you would state your name and address for the
Thank
record.
you.
Thank you.
My name is Tom Carroll. I'm the city manager with the city of Lexington. So the city's address for the next few months is 300 East Washington. And then we'll be moving to a temporary location during a remodel of that facility after the first of the year. So thank you for having me, Madam Chairman, Chairwoman. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to go over a memorandum that we had prepared that was placed into your packet. The conversation about Washington and Lee has provided me an opportunity as a relative newcomer to the city to better understand both how these payments in lieu of taxes and other voluntary contributions from Washington and Lee, as well as VMI, contribute to the city's revenue stream, what that means relative to our expenditures. And I just wanted to take a few minutes tonight, as this is part of the discussion about the benefits of conditional use permits or disbenefits, depending on your perspective, to go over this information that a couple of my colleagues put together. I wanted to acknowledge Jennifer Bell, our finance director, and Karen Roundy, our commissioner of revenue, who I would be understating if I said they put this together. They worked pretty hard on it. So Jen Bell was out of town, so you have to get a presentation for me instead. So I'll do my best. So what I wanted to do is briefly go over the cover memo and point out that the city of Lexington is allowed under the Virginia Code to charge a service fee. And we charge a city service fee for residential properties at both of the colleges in town. The city service fee is charged for residential properties at each institution that are owned by the institution and rented to faculty or staff. In the case of Washington and Lee, there are 19 separate properties. And we do a calculation every year and we figure out what they would be valued at. And we use a formula, and it's detailed in one of these exhibits. It's adjusted every year as valuations or tax rates change. and as costs of service change. And so Washington and Lee, because of these various facilities on campus, they pay 50% of the tax value that they would pay if those were not tax exempt properties. And that in FY24, which we just completed on June 30th, would be $30,080 and some change. VMI has a similar charge, and we do the same calculation for VMI every year. That number, and this is not in your report, but we computed it all the same every year. VMI pays that same charge, $50,809 a year. So those are what I would call non-voluntary, because the city imposes that service charge. And that's, again, specifically for residential property owned by the institution for which they lease to faculty or staff on campus or post. Then we went through the additional analysis that we do. This one is customized just for Washington and Lee. Washington and Lee makes an annual voluntary grant. The voluntary grant is calculated and changed and amended every year, depending on the calculations that are made, the formula that's used, the tax rate, and the assessed valuation. Washington and Lee makes a second voluntary payment equal to the service charge that I just detailed. So if you recall from what I just stated, the city service fee is 50% of what the tax would be if it were taxable. Washington and Lee makes an additional voluntary contribution that essentially makes it as if it was 100% taxable for those rental residential facilities on campus. So that's an additional $30,000 a year in FY24. And then on page 11 of the handout, and I don't know what it is in your packet, but there's an annual exercise that Washington and Lee does with the Commissioner of Revenue. And it's detailed on page 17 of your packet, excuse me, where for all property that the college owns, that the university owns off of campus, and that includes a number of fraternities, the Spanish House, and a number of other facilities and institutions or buildings. They make a voluntary, those are tax exempt properties, but they make a payment in lieu of taxes or pilot. Payment in lieu of taxes is a pilot. And that includes the administrative building at 2 Lee Avenue, various fraternities, and these other properties. Combined, the voluntary payment in lieu of taxes would be $673,689. That figure includes something that Washington and Lee has done since 1990. They make to the city of Lexington a student grant. In 1990, that value was $40,000. In FY24, it has risen to $200,000. So that is simply essentially a gift in recognition of the symbiotic relationship between the city and Washington and Lee. And then the last thing I'll point out in that is both Washington and Lee and VMI have made a commitment to the city of Lexington of $35,000 per year for 10 years each institution. So between VMI and Washington and Lee, the city receives $70,000 a year in voluntary contributions, and that is for our ladder truck, which of course is part of how we protect life safety on both campus and post. So these are significant amounts of money. And in addition, there's 2 other things that I wanted to highlight on page 2 of this memorandum. There are properties that Washington and Lee leases off campus. And so they occupy them for various functions, offices. And when they lease property, the landlord will pay property tax. And presumably Washington and Lee pays that to the landlord in their rent. So in FY24, the amount of leased property that Washington and Lee paid property taxes on was $55,751. I'm sorry, $55,571. And then Washington and Lee also has several other properties off campus. I think there's 14 that are totaled, which are not tax exempt, and those are taxable, and they pay $35,875. Combined, when you add up all these various contributions, most of which are discretionary and part of the 1990 policy, as it has evolved over the years, combined all in total, Washington Lee pays directly or indirectly $765,135. That would be the sum of all those numbers that I've just gone over. To give you an idea, a rough order of magnitude of what does that mean to the city of Lexington. Our real property tax for the entire village or city is 6.3 million. So this contribution, this payment in lieu of taxes, as an order of magnitude is a little over 10% of the city's property tax revenue. The general fund total budget has $22 million in revenue. So that's another benchmark that you could go against. As I mentioned, VMI makes some of those same payments, but not all of those same payments. VMI's contribution is in the neighborhood of 85,000 relative to Washington and Lee's larger contribution. That doesn't include water and sewer fees, which I can get into if you're interested. But as you consider the value of granting conditional use permits, rented property from Washington and Lee has contributed to the tax rolls. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And do any of our members have any questions for Tom?
No, I thank you, Tom, for bringing this forward because it's always part of the discussion. And so I think what you've done is to say this is not part of the discussion for tonight's on the conditional use permit.
I'll leave it up to you, but I think there may be reasons to grant or deny the conditional use permit, but the tax liability is probably not.
I mean, that's what I appreciate. You've taken that issue off the table.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming and this was very helpful. I read it top to bottom and yeah, it's a lot of information and I appreciate the brevity of your presentation about it as well. Thank you so much. Okay. So item B under new business is CUP 2024-05, an application by John Adamson for approval of a conditional use permit allowing portions of the Rockbridge building located at 9 through 17 South Main Street, tax map number 23-1-72A, to be used as an educational facility, college, university, and as a public assembly. Arnie, can we have a staff report?
I'm going to recuse from.
Sorry.
No problem. So just as last time when we considered this case for the first time around, I'm going to read my conflict disclosure statement, same one as before, and step down. So in accordance with Virginia Code 2.2-3112A and 3115F, I declare that I have a personal interest in the City of Lexington Planning Commission's consideration of conditional use permit 2024-05 that may disqualify me from participating. I'm choosing to err on the side of caution in this respect, hereby recusing myself from discussion and voting. My personal interest relates to my employment with Washington Lee University, 204 West Washington Street, Lexington, Virginia, 24450, which has a leasehold interest in the properties that are the subjects of the conditional use permit application in question, identified as tax map number 23-1-72A.
Thank you.
And I have a personal interest in Washington and Lee as my husband's an employee there, but I do not have to recuse myself from the discussion, and I've turned in my disclosure at the beginning of this discussion.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, Leslie. Okay, moving on to the staff report.
Good evening to you all. To start sort of with the history, which is on page 24, we did hold the initial public hearing on August 22nd. And at that point, you had a motion and deferred your decision on the applications to the September 12th date. That was a conflict that the applicant had. So then he requested and we ended up postponing again to this evening. And that initial request for postponement was to gain a better understanding of the value of the investment and how the building is going to be used, and specifically requesting floor plans. And those have been included in your packet this evening. I'm going to go back and quickly review the request since it has been a little bit of time. We have a request for one conditional use permit for 2 uses. The conditional use permit is to allow portions of the building located at 9 to 17 South Main Street, which we typically refer to as the Rockbridge Building and shown in the photograph there. It's located in the C1 Central Business District zoning district to be used as an educational facility, college, university, and as a public assembly. I'm going to ask that you, on page 23, just to review that definition again. In the C1 zoning district, an educational facility is a conditional use permit. And this is a newer definition for us that we added in 2017. So anything that falls within this definition would be a conditional use permit and requires a conditional use permit before that use begins in the C1 zoning district. So an educational facility, college, university is an educational institution authorized by the Commonwealth of Virginia to award associate, baccalaureate, or higher degrees and facilities associated with it. This term includes academic buildings, administrative facilities, dormitories, special housing, parking areas, dining halls, and other physical plants associated with the college or university use. So if W&L proposes anything that falls within that definition of being academic building, administrative facility, dormitories, et cetera, then it requires a conditional use permit. If they have something else that's university related but does not fall within this definition, then they would not need a conditional use permit downtown in the C1 zoning district. And the only not great example I can come up with is a softball field. It is not something that falls within this definition. So if they propose something as ridiculous as a softball field, it would not need a conditional use permit in the C1 zoning district, just as an example. I'm not going to go through your conditions of issuance. I think we covered those in some detail during the last meeting, just as that review. Again, we ask that however you make your decision or your recommendation, that you use these criteria for the basis of that decision. Over on to the next page, which is going to be page 24 of your overall packet. Because of the information that was provided to you at the last meeting, I think we're going to include this first full paragraph there for all your conditional use permits going forward, which is, while conditional uses are considered to have a potentially greater impact upon neighboring properties or the public than those uses permitted by right, conditions must be reasonable and address the impact expected from the proposed use. Additionally, conditions developed to address an expected impact must be proportionally related to the impacts resulting from that expected use. So if you just keep that in mind, if there are any discussions tonight about conditions, if they just be written or composed in such a way that they address an impact and that they also be proportionally related to that expected impact. We had 3 staff recommended conditions. I'll read those through quickly. That number 1, the entire upper and lower levels and that portion of the main level at the rear of the building and located behind the storefronts facing Main Street may be utilized for administrative facilities related to the educational facility, college, university use. Number 2, that only the lower level of the building may be utilized for public assembly purposes. And number 3, that the storefronts facing Main Street are not subject to this conditional use permit. What we're simply trying to accomplish there is there are 2 uses specifically requested, the educational use and also the public assembly. Where in the building particularly are they being requested? So that's what the 3 conditions are trying to accomplish. The floor plans that were provided, I guess Mr. Adamson can answer any questions for you, but again, were provided so that you would get a better understanding, because we were talking about the spine that connects both the grand building to the Rockbridge building and on what floor each of these uses were proposed. So you now have a floor plan in your packet.
Any
Mhm.
favor, especially I mean, this is why I asked for the floor plans. Just for the record, if we could tie, just if you could walk through the conditions. So the first one, the upper and lower levels and the portion of the main at the rear building, you could show us those on the map.
What we tried to do in that first condition. So where is the educational facility being proposed. And perhaps it's easier to, on page 29, that's the basement. So we're starting from the bottom up. On the Rockbridge building is the left-hand portion. You see the spine sort of delineated there, but that lower portion is where the public assembly use and the educational use would be proposed. And if we,
Say 29 on our pages, so tell us
Yeah,
which one that
it does.
is.
Page following 28.
the problem is,
It got cut off.
yeah,
Under the staple.
there's the first page with floor plans, if that helps at all. And
And Mary
apologies,
Stuart,
sometimes when we insert
Yeah.
PDFs, we
the
lose the,
level is down here. Mary Stewart.
Level 3?
down
It'll
here,
say level 3.
1.
It'll say level 1.
Basement.
Oh, okay, that's the basement.
so what may be helpful also, not just that's level 1 of the basement, but the Rockbridge building is to the left of the orange line that we sort of inserted there to demarcate to delineate the difference between the Rockbridge building and what was the Grand's building, and also to further delineate what is this spine that we keep talking about that ends up connecting the two buildings.
Mm.
The conditional use permits are specifically asked for the Rockbridge building, not for the spine and not for the Grand's building. So on the next page, which is level 2, there are 2 retail spaces shown. I think they're about 1,800 square feet, if I remember correctly. So that's really condition number 3, just to point out specifically that the conditional use permits that are requested for the educational facility and for the public assembly do not apply to the 2 retail spaces. Those 2 retail spaces will be separate. And they're basically, I believe, the same square footage as what they are, what were existing prior to the renovations to the building. So off of Main Street, we will continue to have 2 retail spaces. And then to the rear of those spaces, perhaps not entirely, but mostly in that addition that's being added to the back of the building, is where the additional administrative facilities would go, which are the offices, which are part of the educational facility definition. And then when we get up to the upper floor, the level 3, that is all office for administrative facility for the educational use.
So some of these, so these maps, I know that you said that we're not looking at the spine, but it is a little confusing since the spine appears to be and is part of both of these buildings. How does that?
There aren't any office spaces in there. There's no public assembly spaces in there.
Okay.
Well, unless you want to consider a bath, never mind. So this is all supportive space for both uses that will occur if they be retail, if they be office space in either the Grand building or in the Rockbridge building. So there's really no specific office or public assembly use in the spine.
What's the tax map number? Is it one on the address? Is it included in the application for the?
The spine is, if I'm correct, 100% on the property that is the Grand. So it's going to be that.
Right, so it's not
Tax map
included in the tax
number.
map number that we're discussing, that's in the,
And we only advertised the addresses that go along with the Grands, but no, sorry, with the Rockbridge building, not with the Grands building. So we can only do approvals tonight for what is in the Rockbridge building proper. Any other questions on the floor plans? John can do a better job if necessary on explaining how those spaces are divided up.
I just wanted to be clear in the wording. That it's what we're approving.
It won't hurt my feelings if you want to clean that up some.
It's all right. The floor plans are helpful.
Arnie, the conditions you had at the last meeting for conditional use permits verbiage is a little different than the one you have in today's packet.
Yeah, our conditions for issuance,
Correct.
they should not be, I hope they're not. Because those are the same conditions for issuance that we always have. Now, I might have cut and pasted and paraphrased a little bit in that memo that we had last meeting, but the conditions for issuance should be the same is what was in that memo. Because those are pulled straight from our zoning ordinance.
So these. It's just that these have. Commentary.
Oh, yeah, sorry, in italics, provide you for what it's worth, because I've been requested to
I see.
my review of the individual ones for this particular CUP request. So you can take that into consideration or not.
Yeah, that it's helpful to have that.
There are no further questions. We did have 4 letters that were submitted. 3 are in your packet. And then 1 additional came in 2 days ago, and we forwarded that to you by email. And I think you have a copy in front of you this evening. If I could address a couple of the comments that we did have in some of those additional comments that were submitted. One talked about the huge amount of construction that has already taken place, and the same thing appeared to have happened with the Press Brown building. So I just need to explain the timeline a little bit, in the sense that I did not realize fully that, or at all, that the definition had changed for educational facility. So prior to, and we'll go back to your August 22nd meeting when we had the renewal for the courthouse, where Debbie now had public assembly and also private school use in there. We had that private school use as a CUP, but we didn't have a definition. So in the 2017 update to the zoning ordinance, we added the educational facility definition, and that's the one that I read from earlier. And it was pointed out to me as we were reviewing the CUP for the courthouse that administrative facility is office use. I don't know how you could argue otherwise. So that's when we realized, oh, the Rockbridge building will need a conditional use permit because it has administrative facilities in it. And that's why the building permits had already been issued and a significant amount of work had already gone on for that. But we are requiring, obviously, the developer to come in and ask for a conditional use permit. That's what we're doing tonight for the Rockbridge building. We could not, because of a legal term about vested rights, go back and ask for him since he's completed the project. The investment has been there for quite some time for the Press Brown building in particular. That's sort of a vested right, and we cannot ask him to come back in front of you and the council for that. Any questions about the timeline in particular, how we got here and what we have and have not required of Mr. Adamson?
What would be the normal timeline? What would be a normal timeline if someone wanted to undertake a project that required a conditional use permit? Would they do it before they begin construction?
You would not want to put the investment in, most folks would not want to put the investment into a building without having that approval.
Right.
And then more specifically, because it's also in downtown historic preservation district, we cannot issue a building permit until a conditional use, a certificate of appropriateness has been issued. And I'll get to that in a minute because there are questions about that at the last meeting. So those have been requested prior to most of the building permits being issued. An internal demolition permit was issued prior to the COA for the exterior improvements. So there was a little bit of work being done there, but for a conditional use permit, the applicant should come in and obtain that prior to getting a permit, simply because you would not want to get too far into a process with that type of investment without having that use approved.
But the only reason that we're considering this a conditional use permit is because of who's occupying those offices. That's correct. Yes. So if the renter, the lessee, was actually somebody else, anybody else other than VMI, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. They wouldn't have had to come for a CUP, correct?
That is correct. In the C1 zoning district, medical office and general office are by right uses, and they would not require a conditional use permit in the public hearing process.
And Arnie, just on the, for the Rockbridge building. So the building permit was already issued
Parts of a permit were already issued,
for
yes.
demolition, interior and,
Then some work for footers and foundation and that spine, because that spine is a structural component. So some of that was let, yes.
so in effect, we're catching up.
In this situation, yes, because it wasn't again until we were going through the review of the conditional use permit for the courthouse that we realized, oh, if W&L is going to be a tenant in the Rockbridge building, then they also need a conditional use permit.
Thank you.
There's also a question in one of the comments that we received or statements that questioning whether a pre-approval had already been issued behind closed doors. And I just want to reiterate or state for the record that there has been no pre-approval of any kind. Just explain the timeline, and it is a bit of an odd timeline, and so not the typical timeline that we would do, but it's because of the information that came in about the new definition or that realization, and that's why we're doing the conditional use permit now. There's also a comment about improvements to the Press Brown building, showing how Adamson's like caring about downtown. And just wanted to state that that building, the Press Brown building, because it's been referenced a couple of times, that went through both our ARB's approval, Architectural Review Board, so our Historic Preservation Board, and also the state's board of for architecture, because there were tax credits, historic preservation tax credits. So there were two architectural boards that reviewed that project. And while I understand some people may not be terribly happy with the look of it, I would argue that at least it's an improvement for what was there before, but the point really being that it went through two architectural boards for approval, as is the process for both anything downtown on the exterior. And if you're going through the historic preservation tax credits by the state, you go through their approval process as well.
And did they also receive a CUP for not having a storefront in the front of that building? Right,
No,
that's,
the only thing that we have downtown proper in C1 as far as use regulations for the first floor is a requirement that a residential use on the first floor be hidden behind office, retail, or a lobby space, and that's a conditional use permit. So we do not require a conditional use permit for office space or anything other than retail space on the first floor, if that answers your question.
It
So
does.
again, the only restriction we have is for residential space on the first floor.
so if we wanted to ensure that there were storefronts on the first floor and the front of buildings, then that would be something that we would have to take up.
Correct. And look at quite closely.
Yeah.
Just sort of a comment, maybe helpful, maybe not. 10 years ago, downtown wasn't what we have today, thanks to LDDA, Main Street, Lexington, huge improvements. So if you're sort of on that continuum of a really deteriorated downtown and you have no users whatsoever, an office use isn't such a bad thing. It's at least perhaps better than residential space, which is just completely dead most of the day. So you have some activity, but then now as we're filling space up and huge improvements have been done, maybe we want to dissuade some of the office spaces. But I'm not quite convinced personally that we're at that stage, but it is perhaps worthy of a conversation.
Okay.
We also provided the minutes from the August 22nd meeting, because the minutes that are in your packet are just from your last meeting. So we were thinking that perhaps it might be helpful for you to see the minutes from the August 22nd meeting, which started this particular public hearing, just in case you needed that. That's all I have for comments or presentation. Happy to answer any questions. Oh, sorry, I forgot one thing. We did the COA. Mr. Adamson did come through the Architectural Review Board, and for actually a number of things so that he could provide a more sort of holistic proposal of what he's proposing for the front of both the Rockbridge and the Grands building, the side of the Grands building, and the rear of both of them that you can see from McCrum's. So that went to the ARB a while ago. There was some comment of what was specifically requested and approved and why is there so much plywood up. So on the elevation for the Rockbridge building, you specifically asked to repaint the trim of the Rockbridge building, not the brick, just the trim, to the Shenandoah taupe color, and also replace the business doors of 17 South Main Street with wood doors matching the business door at 13. So one of the two doors may not have been a wooden historic door anymore, and he wanted to replicate the wooden door.
So in this picture,
Mhm.
are they replacing the uphill or the downhill door?
I'm guessing the uphill
Uphill. Okay.
door because we're increasing
But
numbers
yes,
towards
it's
the
a
left.
double door.
And then there's also one window mullion, I believe, that needed to be replaced that had been missing from years ago. And so those are the two things. And I believe there's also, there was a desire to remove the awning, but I don't recall if that was specifically in the request or not. So very minimal improvements were requested from the ARB and approved by the ARB for the Rockbridge building. And for what it's worth, we also have the rest of the drawings for both the other two sides, if anybody wanted to look at them.
If you could
yeah,
bring 'em up,
can you-
that'd
yeah.
be great.
Ernie, to clarify if they desired office space in the front that we're calling, I guess, the front of the building retail space, they would need a different conditional use permit than what they're requesting for the rear, or is that?
Correct. If in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, they wanted to put office space where we now have retail space shown. So we're going to tie this to the floor plan or through the conditions. Right now, there has to be retail on the main level for 1,800 square feet each for two. So if that at some point changed to office space for the university, then another conditional use permit or a modification to this one would have to be requested.
Yeah, only for the university.
Only for the university. If somebody else wanted to come in and put in office space, unless we change the code, but any other office space that's medical general office is by right in the C1 zoning district. There's no prohibition against it currently being on that first or main level.
Does anybody else have any questions for Arnie? Or Arnie, was that the?
That was it.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. That was really helpful. Anybody have any questions, comments? Don, you look like you're.
Well, yes, there you go. Thank you. Back to the retail space, Arnie, is there any guarantee that it remains retail or could it be, sorry if this was asked earlier. Okay. Is there any guarantee that it remains retail or could it be converted to another use?
It can be converted to any other permitted use without coming before you. Right. So if that other permitted use is an office use or any other permitted use for the C1 zoning district, then they could do that without coming back for a conditional use permit. Presumably that change would also require maybe a change to the front or a different sign, and then they would go they would go to the lovely ARB for their approval.
Now that's unless it was a university use, in which case it would come back to us. So for example, if they wanted to have a store in the front that was a Washington and Lee store, it would have to come to us. I have that correct. Yes, Arnie?
Anything that is in the C1 zoning district that is educational facility that includes academic buildings, administrative facilities, dormitories, special housing, parking areas, dining halls, or other physical plants associated with the college or university use would require a conditional use permit.
So would a store fall into physical plant?
Physical plant, probably.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
And this is a question, it'll come up later, but the assembly areas, what in your mind, what's the definition or what's the use associated with assembly areas?
Didn't provide that, did we? Public assembly is a facility that accommodates public assembly for sports, amusements, entertainment purposes. Typical uses include auditoriums, sports stadiums, convention facilities, and incidental sales and exhibition facilities. So that's what we have for a public assembly.
Sorry, could you read that again?
A little slower. I forgot my hearing aids. Arnie.
Public assembly, facilities that accommodate public assembly for sports, amusements, or entertainment purposes. Typical uses, not exclusive, but typical uses include auditoriums, sports stadiums, convention facilities, and incidental sales and exhibition facilities.
So this is for a fun space. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think what we heard at the last meeting was there was just the request for that. Not 100% sure that that's going to happen here, but similar to the courthouse, flexibility in the use, particularly, and we're only talking about the basement at this, the lowest level that only has access out to McCrum's. So if there is a group meeting of some sort, and it doesn't say X number of people, but just to allow that particular flexibility in the use of space, if, and I'm going to just use MockCon because that's the sort of example that keeps coming up, is if they wanted to hold a work group, a number of things that could, for their own exhibition that they hold. But so if they wanted to meet there as a sort of in a mass, then we do need something other than just regular administrative facility or office use. So again, I don't think it's necessarily going to happen, but it was just a request so that there is flexibility in the future to allow that use to happen if it indeed is necessary.
And what about like I don't know, a food venue or like a space, like there used to be a space on campus called the Cockpit that had, I don't know, concerts and food and
It's a restaurant with some
Restaurant,
band
yeah.
space at night.
right. Would that fall under this? It doesn't quite seem like it could, but on the other hand, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the food portion of that necessarily, but let's just say it was, assembly for amusement. I mean,
So
you go to-
concert,
yeah, I would
But
think
but
so.
some of those restaurants are allowed downtown, not if W&L's running the restaurant, but a restaurant in downtown is okay.
sure. Yeah, no, I'm just thinking, just sort of playing out what the options are and whether that would, I just don't have a sense of,
A meeting,
I
it's a
hadn't thought of,
meeting space.
right, I just hadn't thought of the assembly space. I think of, public assembly or that doesn't necessarily to me mean entertainment. Maybe it should.
What-
And,
Okay.
and I have a question while we're on the subject of the basement. So these areas here would be the public assembly at this point, but what is this in the back? On that, those look like more offices, but.
And-
Is that,
Mr. Adamson can
okay.
Right. yeah.
confirm, but I believe that's office space that's in the newer portion towards the back.
And but the assembly space is the long, open areas.
And just to be clear, the way we've written the condition, it would be for the entire lower level. So if you wanted to cut that back to not be included in that office area that you're noticing towards the back, you could also do that.
Sorry, could you say that? I didn't follow you.
Condition number 2, I just wanted to be clear that the condition number 2 that we've proposed says that only the lower level of the building may be utilized for public assembly purposes. You're pointing out that the back portion has some office space in it. And we're just saying, just because it's the lowest level, the whole thing, you could easily, if you preferred, to cut back the public assembly to that lower level that does not include the office space on that floor plan,
Put that in the stipulation.
if you wanted.
And I guess that would ensure that whatever the activity was that was going on in there would be internal to the building and it wouldn't sort of have the same kind of spillover.
Well, everything that we're dealing with is internal to the building only, so.
Yeah, sorry, I mean, it wouldn't be on an external wall. There wouldn't be a,
But in this case, the external wall is the parking lot.
indeed. Okay. Any other questions or
Well,
concerns?
just to follow up on that. For clarity purposes only. So the first condition, the entire upper and lower levels. And that portion of the main level at the rear of the building located behind the storefronts may be utilized for administrative facilities. So that, I think that I want to be clear that that covers the offices on the lower level, on level one,
Mhm.
the way it reads. Because, I mean, the whole thing in the beginning of this, what was strange is that you're taking a building and carving up uses within it, get for special uses within it. So it's just to be clear that the text matches the floor plan.
You could also easily, now that we have a set of floor plans, just say that the development shall be in compliance with the floor plans that were submitted on whatever date and get rid of the other, what's written here in text, perhaps not so clearly.
Although then that requires that somebody go to the floor plans. I mean, could you have a parallel structure, like a description and the floor plans?
Yeah, we've done that before.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah,
you just add that as a fourth condition.
I
right.
think John is pointing out correctly that we may not have included that lower back portion on the lowest level of being an administrative facility where there are office spaces shown.
No, it is in number one.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it
Entire
says upper and lower levels.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry.
Yeah, it's there. If
Gotcha.
that, if we agree that that covers it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to be sure on the wording. And no, we don't want it to say, well, the office to the left of the one on the back side is not included, but the others are. Okay, sorry. Okay,
All right,
thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, we are ready for the applicant statement. If Mr. Adamson would like to come up and state your name and address.
Good evening, John Adamson, 9301 River Road, Richmond, Virginia, 23229. And ladies and gentlemen of the commission, thank you very much for your time. Last time I was here, you asked me to submit some plans and I did so. So if you have questions, I'm happy to run through those. There's one clarity on the, and I think I probably introduced it, but the tax map number that was on the parcel is for the Rockbridge building. But the 911 addresses that we've covered are sort of inclusive of part of the spine. So that's a little bit confusing. I'm not sure that it's required. There was no intention here to mislead in any shape, way, or fashion, but technically the grand building is 1 through 9 or 11. 11 sort of lost out there somewhere. And the Rockbridge building is 13 through 17 South Main. So I sort of captured 9 through 17 now Main in the description, but I think the plan sort of specifies the intent. But if it needs to stick with the tax map parcel number, as long as there's clarity on the connection of the spine, then that's great. Questions on that?
Yeah, I actually do. For Arnie, do we need to change that so that we have the Rockbridge in the CUP? Change it so that it's 13 through 17, so that it's specifically not including the spine, since we are specifically not talking about the spine.
I think we're fine as long as we use the tax map number.
Yeah, in the motion, if we use that motion, it has a tax
Okay.
map number.
Okay, great.
Just didn't want there to be
Thank you.
confusion there. If Arnie was surprised at finding this language in the ordinance, you can only imagine my surprise. So in fairness, so there was never any intention, as I indicated last time, to take advantage of the system or do anything that wasn't just absolutely forthright and forthcoming. So just stating that as a matter of fact. And then as far as the assembly space, I need to put that in context of the broader conversation. So when we came forth last time, we were renewing a conditional use for the meeting room in the back of the courthouse, which was deemed to be assembly space. So specific definition of that was just the idea and thought that it was a space available for the community. So as we were looking at this project and looking at the fact that we had some open, unprogrammed spaces, not exactly sure what they were going to be, I myself, not the tenant or user, suggested, well, maybe we should just include assembly space here. So we have flexibility in case someone has a meeting, what is an assembly space or isn't, or if they wanted to allow somebody to use the space, could someone use the space? It was never intended to be a restaurant. It was never intended to be anything untoward. It was in context of the previous request. It just was, oh, this makes sense. So I'm hoping the conversation doesn't really get hung up around that. If it does, I wouldn't be totally opposed to pulling it. I think that that would be unfortunate because I think that would limit other potential possible meeting spaces that may be available to folks. But that was me, not them. And I just want to be really clear about that.
Thank you.
That's all I have. And I'm trying to keep it brief because of everybody's time. Is there anything else I can say?
Anybody have
I,
questions?
I have a question about that public assembly space again.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that, maybe I didn't read the request carefully enough, but has that been, allowed for the public, or is it gonna also just be for WNL? Because that part was a little unclear to me.
If I could make one just clarification. I should have done this at the last meeting when we were talking about the courthouse in particular. Public assembly doesn't mean necessarily the public has the right to go in there. It just means a meeting space of people. So in the courthouse, it said public assembly, but it's still according to the owner and the tenants use of the building and how they want to control it.
Okay.
So, and luckily they have been in the courthouse allowing members of the public, Main Street, Lexington, others to go and hold meetings there. But that doesn't mean that the public has the right in public assembly to go into the building. It just means a meeting or a large group of folks, not necessarily public access.
Well, to take that one step further, what would be, I don't know, maybe you as the owner would have some say, but I guess WNL as the primary lessee would also have a say as to who could assemble in there. Who could, how do you decide that?
I think part of it comes in the fact that there's certain code requirements for life safety and other things that are
Okay.
required when you have a certain number of people in a space.
Right?
For sake of everybody's time and what's on the table, I would rather pull that off the table and just say it won't be used as assembly space. I feel like there are lots of places that people can meet, which wasn't the case 15 years ago, 17 years ago. Now we do have lots of wonderful spaces. I do think it would be nice for the potential if a group wanted to use this and the school was open to them being able to use the space to be not to be in compliance with zoning, to be able to use the space. But if this is creating concern, I'd rather just retract it because it was not an ask of the user. It was something that I thought in the context of both of these coming forward at the same time. Oh, this is just logical. We don't know how it's going to be used. Let's just put it in there. But there's no hidden agenda
No.
whatsoever.
No, it does involve other situations, for example, the parking that would then be required for say there's a presentation by an art critic or something, and then there's the parking all that goes with that. That's just one example, but I was also thinking of does somebody also need to, in that situation, have to have insurance? Would they have to have insurance for that kind of an assembly? And that can be a deal breaker, perhaps.
I put it in there is just what I thought was something that made sense to me and me alone. And so what I would suggest is that if this is a concern for the commission, I'd rather just retract it and take it off the table and say, don't worry about the assembly use. That's not a driver for me.
Can I suggest that we put a pin in that and see how the conversation goes?
Absolutely.
Because I don't I don't know where the rest of us would sit on that, but
That's wonderful. I'm just sharing with you
Sure.
that that's not a
Okay.
primary driver.
yep, and we can revisit that before, if it turns out that we feel like we need to say something about that.
Is there anything else I can answer for anybody else?
Yes. Thank you for the floor plans. I was counting up offices and I'm not sure I counted correctly. Do you know what the total number of offices that will be included in the Rockbridge building?
I'm happy to retreat and count, but I'm not sure actually myself.
Okay,
Um,
I counted 30, but I may be wrong I don't know how I'm reading the floor. I might be doubling up or
So there is some additional space, but there were lots of little teeny offices in the building previously.
Yeah.
What's the exact count from what was there to what is there? I can't speak to without actually doing a little counting, but I'm happy to come back and give that to you.
Well, that was part of my question, John, was what was the net increase from the previous structure to this structure? Because it goes back to the number of users and the number of staff in there. So I'm trying to get a sense of how many people will be in the building.
I will have to sort of retreat and give you a count. My suspicion is that the potential of what it had previously versus what we were requesting maybe within the magnitude of 5 or 6 plus or minus additional.
Okay, I can't say for sure. I was only in the upstairs building once. It was a rabbit's warren,
Lots of little teeny.
but okay. The reason I'm asking is that leads to the question I have about parking and, I know that Arnie has told us that it's not a requirement. On the other hand, that's why I'm trying to understand the number of people that will be working there and where, has there been any agreement with W&L as to where people will be parking? Is there any discussion on that?
There has been some discussion. I would like to just start off the conversation. Well, one, I don't speak for them. Tom is here, so I would
Yeah, and
gladly let him speak to this.
right.
Second, the only thing that makes this unique is that the individuals that work in this building receive a check from W&L as opposed to Lewis Gale or Carillion or anyone else. They would be by right and we wouldn't be there. I do feel that on a personal level that if there are extended permits requested from office users in the downtown C1 district that are granted by the parking department, maybe there's some consideration for office users, whether they be affiliated with the school or not, to have certain areas they can park that sort of predetermined and discussed. So I know the school has its own parking deck. I know that folks that work on campus have to park somewhere and walk to those spaces. So, it wouldn't be a very long walk to park on campus and walk to this space. So I will let Tom take it from there, but I think that that's a workable solution.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. And for asking Tom to also maybe weigh in on that one, because that parking has been one of the concerns that's been raised consistently in discussions I've had with people. And you're right that there are ways to create parking. Leslie was telling me about that today. But I did a walk around just Monday, Tuesday, around 10:45 and 11 and before 10 and then after 11. And the parking, and I walked down Main Street and Nelson, Washington. I basically did the square, around. And the parking does fill up. Now, that was only on Monday and Tuesday. So I think it is a concern that's been raised about by, what's the impact on the shopping? So to give you exact numbers, walking down South Main Street from Preston to Nelson, On Monday, there were 3 open spaces. On Tuesday, there were 4. And then later in the afternoon, there was only 1. On Main from Nelson to Washington, there were 0. On Tuesday, there were more, 7. Washington Street, Main to Jefferson, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but the point is, if I add up all the totals, I have 16 parking spaces on Monday that are available in that loop, including McCrum's. Interesting, McCrum's on Monday morning was 0 spaces available. Tuesday at 9:45, there were 7, and by 11:15, there were none. And forget Wednesday, because that's market day. So I think the parking is an issue, and and maybe we can talk about it more, what W&L intends to do about that.
Can I say something really quick? So I worked at the admissions office for a year and a half, and it's on the edge of campus, and parking was always an issue there. It's the lots that are closest to those buildings on the edge of campus fill up almost immediately, and it's very rare for somebody to, most coworkers would utilize street parking before they would park in the garage almost any single day, because it's more convenient to walk, and this is even further out than that. So I would be concerned about how they would. I know that public safety has been very adamant about being mindful of parking on campus, but I can't imagine they can go off and cite tickets in the town. And as somebody who was involved in parking in that, it's very difficult, and parking garage is not always adequate even for parking space for the employees.
I could just reiterate that in the C1 zoning district, there is no off-street parking requirement.
Right.
So that's what makes this conversation a little bit difficult. Yes, there may be impacts, and yes, you have the subjective portions of your criteria that you can go through. I just need to, for the record, say it again, that in C1, there is no off-street parking requirement. And to put a finer point on it even than that is, if this were a tenant other than the university, we wouldn't be having this discussion at all through the CUP process. So we have to provide, we being the city, provides parking as a utility in parking lots according to parking permits and along the street and in the garage. And we have, can't remember what the data is, but somewhere around 2009, there was an extensive parking study done where they counted all the spaces, and I can't remember the number, but for quite a lot. Yeah, they may not be directly up front or on the main streets or in the main parking lots, but sometimes you just have to travel all the way over the Roy Smith parking lot, which we've done here. So sometimes you might have to walk a little bit further, but in most cases, you will find that parking studies, and ours definitely came to the conclusion that we have enough spaces. It's just about management.
And it may be time for a new parking study, just in terms of, I don't know how frequently those are, or how long they stay good for, but it has been, that's going on 20, well, it's 15 years anyway.
I can't remember the date of the other one, so it could be older or newer, but I don't recall. But we also have strategies to fill the upper floors of our down. We want to more fully utilize the building space that we have. And is that going to create additional parking? Perhaps. But I think we're on the hook, I would suggest, more so than each developer as they're developing projects, because we want them to. That's in the comp plan.
And so Arnie was telling me earlier that the police department sells parking passes for the McCrum's lot. So that allow you to park there longer. This was news to me. Like, wow, this whole thing. And that they oversell the lot so that it's not like you have a single person and then you can't park there. And anyway, so that all seems fine. I'm just wondering whether they also sell extended, and I didn't have time to look at this. Do they sell extended parking passes in the garage? And is that something that
There are other long-term, you'll see little signs on occasion, and I've never bought a parking pass, so I can't really say. But what my understanding is there are also other lots that are a little bit more remote than say McCrum's that'll have LTP, long-term parking. So you can get a pass for that and park there all day. If I'm not mistaken, the garage does not allow overnight parking because they want it to clear out. So I don't think you can park there for a number of days. Now, there may have been an agreement with Ugo for some of his hotel guests to perhaps park over there. I've heard that before and have no confirmation of that. But no long-term overnight parking, I think, in the garage.
So I suspect that this is a conversation that we might need to take up, and when I say we, I mean like the city might need to take up in terms of addressing parking, and perhaps a parking study is in order. But to reiterate what Arnie said, this is not something that we can, unless there's some way of saying, you know, that parking is creating a problem with one of the four, one of those four areas that you have to grant that have to pass for a CUP. Then it's not something that we are probably going to be able to have any traction on this. Is that, I mean, that's
Well, you
sort of
may-
my sense of this.
That's my sense as well, but you may be more creative than I and be able to attach the parking to one of those four conditions of issuance potentially. But again,
So-
it's
so
simply not a
the-
requirement.
Right. The one that it would be, I think, would be the D, which is adequate public services, including streets and other traffic ways, utilities, police and fire protection, are or reasonably will be available to support the proposed use, but that specifically does not include parking. So again, perhaps that's something that we need to consider changing.
I agree with everything that's been said. I brought it up not because I assumed that someone from an office worker in the building will be parking in front of a commercial establishment on South Main. That will happen. That's human nature. I've been known to go and move my car every 3 hours at times when I worked at certain places. And when I worked at a university, it would cost you a lot of money to park on the street if you wanted to feed the meter all day. So generally you did have to walk a good ways from a parking lot that was designated. I'm bringing this up not so much, I mean, Arnie's right, it's not a requirement. It's not a reason to withhold, but we would be negligent and really Arnie's correct, it's on the city. But we'd be negligent to kind of keep saying, well, it's not a problem that we can really address by the regulations.
That's why I say we might
And
need
maybe
to.
one of the simple
move.
things is if Tom can tell us as a university who's a good neighbor, that this is what we intend to do for the parking for the staff. It's a simple question.
Yeah.
I think regardless of what is inside that building, parking is gonna be an issue.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think it's because W&L or because office.
No,
space
it's
or because
not.
anything. It's,
But
if it's condos, it's still parking. If it's
correct,
literally anything, it is still parking.
correct. But
Right.
we have an opportunity to have a discussion here that may not be part of the regulatory discussion. That's saying, how can W&L help to mitigate the problem? It doesn't have to be part of the regulatory discussion we have.
So conversation then with Tom as opposed to with John?
Um,
I mean, John, would you be willing to engage in further conversation with W&L about parking? I don't know exactly what avenues you would have to say, you know, W&L, what are you planning to do with all those people's cars?
I think Mr. Carroll sort of outlined in a very transparent, thoughtful way that hadn't been done before, to my knowledge, you know, the things that Washington and Lee does without asking for anything in return, right? They just do it. They do it quietly. And if there was any question about, you know, their them being a good neighbor, hopefully that outlined, asked and answered, in my judgment.
Mhm.
I learned some stuff tonight about that as well. And those numbers didn't include the tax dollars that are paid regarding properties that I own that they also occupy. So that number increases, just for the record. That said, I think given that good-spirited nature, there's certainly an opportunity to talk about how do we make sure that there's not an adverse impact. To my knowledge, I'm not aware that anybody's brought to my attention that there's been an adverse parking impact regarding the old courthouse building at 2 South Main and people that occupy that building. But in any event, I think there's certainly an opportunity to have that discussion in an open-armed way. This may not be the time to do that, but there's certainly an opportunity to do that.
Since you mentioned it, do you know where people who work at the courthouse park?
I'm not exactly
Yeah,
sure where they,
that's not
where they
true.
park,
Okay.
where they park or walk or. Not exactly sure.
I have some other questions.
Yeah,
if you-
please.
Okay, ready to. Do you have tenants for the retail space, John?
I do not, but I think that the tenants that moved into the Grand Building did so graciously. And the idea is that they have first right of refusal to move back into those spaces. I think the intention is for it to be retail storefront space. We've optimized the size of the spaces to support that use. And one question that hasn't come up, but we talked last meeting about right sizing that. And some of that's about travel distance to get to the door, the life safety without needing a secondary exit and those sorts of things. So no, those tenants have not been identified. We haven't marketed, but my assumption is that it will be some of the nicer space along that section of Main Street, certainly the newest, freshest space, certainly sprinklered. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to run it very quickly, but we have not started working on that process yet.
Okay, and I know we're only speaking of one building, but I have to ask because of the connection with the spine. But to the best that you can tell us, what are the intentions for the connected Grand Building?
I am not totally sure exactly what we're doing with that building. Right now, we've got a roof that leaks. We've got the roof torn off a portion of the building. I'm trying to get closed back up and then start focusing on what's on that side and how we're going to handle that side. What has been stated is that we want, from the very beginning, it's been stated that we want what's facing Main Street to remain retail. That would be inclusive of the Grand's building as well as the Rockbridge building. And then there's also an opportunity that we've discovered that we presented last time where you've actually saw an elevation of it, where we could open up a storefront from the Washington Street side on the downhill portion that was closer to where Clover used to be. That'll introduce a new storefront that Main Street or Washington doesn't presently have. So all of those would sort of be public facing retail is our spirit and our intention.
And a question that's been asked to me is, would would you anticipate coming back with another W&L related use in that building?
I'll never say never, and I have no idea, but I can tell you right now that there's no agreement in place for any other space as it relates to the Main Street level in that building and as it relates to the Main Street level of that building.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Before you started construction and renovation, were there office spaces in the area that we're discussing for the CUP previously? Were they offices or?
I'm just processing what you're saying really quickly, just to say clearly, yes. So in the lower level, they were a little gross and they were a little moldy, but yes, there were some offices in the lower level in addition to some storage. But behind the retail, there were office spaces there too. You may or may not recall there was a weird addition on stilts that had lime kiln, I think rented some space in there for a period of time. And then the entire upper level was all office space.
Okay.
There's also an addition being put onto the back of the building, so there's more space now than there was previously.
Are there any other?
Do we have, John has vocalized that there are some, people that offer, or have concerns, and, I'm wondering, has the W&L bookstore asked for a lease there?
There's not been any formal ask of a bookstore in the grand building of me.
And we're not
I've
talking
heard the
about.
same
green
boomers that
building.
you've heard if you want
Okay.
to ask the question, but the answer to your question, I have no agreement in place. And that decision has not come to me.
Okay,
And also, I'll just say that that if it did, it would have to have a conditional use
I
permit.
thought so. I thought so.
yeah.
That's where I was going next. Okay,
Correct.
That's
So
right.
certainly unrelated
Okay.
to anything.
thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Okay, now we will open the floor up to public comment about this issue on the agenda. So if anyone in our audience would like to come up and make a statement, if you would just step up to the podium and state your full name and address. And we would love to hear anything that you have to say.
Good evening. My name is Michael Perry, and I live at 309 South Jefferson Street. I would urge the commission to deny the request for a CUP. I speak for a lot of people that can't be here tonight, that are citizens of Lexington that aren't associated in any way with W&L. And the overall feeling that I have and a number of other people have is that W&L continues to encroach on the city and downtown of Lexington. If this permit is issued, W&L will hold some of the most prime real estate in downtown at their exclusive use of their students, faculty, staff, and alumni. That doesn't do anything for the rest of the community that is not associated with one of those groups or W&L. They have the courthouse, which is a historic building that could be used for so many other things besides the administrative office here in downtown Lexington. You can't tell me there's not enough space on the W&L campus that they couldn't put offices and administrative functions on land that they already own. The $765,000 that they currently pay to the city of Lexington in some way or other is basically, it's a pretty paltry sum amount of money compared to the amount of services they get from the city of Lexington for water, public safety, etc. It's, I've been told that the only time that the W&L really encroaches into the city is when it's cheaper for them to buy or lease space rather than, doing new construction on campus. This is another example of this encroachment. Nothing personal against Mr. Adamson, but it appears that he is a proxy for W&L because all the buildings he owns in town appear to be, and I may be wrong about this, appear to be leased by W&L. It's kind of interesting also that Arnie stated earlier that there was no pre-approval in place for this project because I find it hard to believe that you would go through all this expensive construction without having a permit in place. So I find that to be, kind of a hollow argument or maybe incredulous. As a citizen, I just think that Lexington needs to remain Lexington and not become W&L's extension of the campus. W&L has done many things, the encroachment of the triangle over by the Lenfest Center. They went and tore down a historic building without telling anybody or getting anybody's, input on it. It just happened overnight. The continued expansion of the footprint of WNL into the business district, is preventing small businesses from having a retail space, even though, yes, we're creating some retail space in that, but it still is not, it still, I think, should be denied. The use of the mail center, that was a viable retail space. It's now a conference room and a mail center that only benefits WNL. So I personally speak for myself and a number of other people who are not happy with the total encroachment of WNL into the town. And we should be good neighbors, and we are good neighbors to them, and they need to be a good neighbor to us as well. This town is not all about WNL or VMI. So I would urge you to deny the request for a conditional use permit.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would? Yes, come on up. And please state your name and address.
My name is James Dixon. My address is 114 Lee Avenue in Lexington. And I am here, I actually came out of curiosity, but hearing the gentleman's comments before, I'd like to offer an alternative perspective as a resident in town. And that is, I look at, and by the way, I'm a VMI graduate, so I'm not a WNL graduate. Let me just be clear about that. I look at VMI, I look at WNL, and I say, they are General Motors, they are Ford, and this is Detroit. They feed this community. I'm not sure what Lexington would be other than a small nail stop were it not for these universities. I have struggled to understand, although I've never been presented, I've never made the effort to learn the details of this. I've been surprised when I hear people who object to, as this gentleman did, and I respect his right to do so. I don't understand why it is not a good thing that whether it's WNL or VMI participate in the town more fully and make use of properties and make those properties better as a result of that. For example, the building in the Triangle area that was torn down, I was happy to see it torn down because it was an eyesore, and to have it removed, I think, is a benefit, not a detraction from the quality, the image of our fine little town. And so the idea of taking a building that was quite old, that in many respects was run down and was not serviceable, and making it something that is delightful and will encourage retail use more than it would have otherwise in its former version, I think is a very good thing for Lexington, and I encourage support of this recommendation.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, oops, sorry. My name is Tina Miller and I live at 52 Liberty Lane, Natural Bridge, Virginia. I do have have had businesses downtown, including one that occupied the formal I own ladles and linens for 18 years. And so I was in that space for many, many years. So the building in question, I was there, and knew that it was filled. It also, by the way, my understanding was it had having gone up there a lot, I had offices in that funky space that you were talking about, but having gone up there, there was also residential use, which seems like what a beautiful thing to have residential use, because I know we're lacking in that. I already gave you a letter of some of which I learned a lot last week or the last time we were here for the meeting. So I won't dwell on that. One thing I will say is I thank you guys for all your time and all that you do. I appreciate very much WNL and VMI, and I agree that it would not be the same town if those two institutions were not here. However, I do think that having them where they are, they're, you know, is good, or using the land that they already have is a better use, you know, using that land already. I do worry very much about encroaching into downtown Lexington further than we already have. Because once done, there may not be any turning back from this. And the next thing you know, we've got, you know, as the first gentleman, Mr. Perry stated, you know, we've got basically W&L owning much, and it's a slippery slope. Any acquisition of space that in downtown, let me put glasses on. But any acquisition of square footage in downtown by W&L reduces the supply of space for businesses and residents, which will also drive up rent prices. So if we're using up all those spaces further by W&L, who can, as it's been brought up, pay, you know, very high rent spaces, rent for those spaces. What about the businesses who would have been there, that could have been there? Like that, one of the things that was brought up for the cup is about, would it alter the fabric of the community or something of that nature? And I do think that there is a potential that it will definitely be not good for the community. And again, what about the other businesses that now have lost that opportunity? There will be no space for them to go. And when I was there, by the way, and that building for many, many years, it was mostly full. It was not just an empty building that was crumbling or anything. We had our offices in the basement. We also had our offices in that funky thing. And then we had ladles and linens there. And again, I don't want to think that W&L or VMI, I very much appreciate them. I do agree that that is their huge critical component of the area. I just worry about the land being taken and or the space being taken. I also bring up the proxy idea that Mr. Perry brought up. My understanding is W&L is not allowed to own any more space, and the proxy thing that Mr. Perry brought up, I thought was a good point. That, gosh, it's kind of like it's, you know, we're using a different, like a workaround to be able to use, you know, get into spaces that, and again, I don't know why the whole reasoning for W&L can't own those, but I just do think that is a proxy. And then also about the parking conversation that you all brought up. It's interesting now because merchants and restaurateurs are today going back and forth about issues with parking. So that today was brought up, and there's going to be a bunch of merchants and restaurateurs that are going to create a parking committee because they're really struggling with that. And I realize that it's not required for C1 areas that was brought up, but it is very much relevant to the effect on downtown and the success of restaurants and merchants and things like that. It is very much a relevant fact and is very much as far as the affecting the community, affecting the neighborhood. And it is a very slippery slope. I mean, as soon as you start losing one business, it's one business, then two businesses, then four businesses, then 10 businesses. It's not usually, you know, it's like, this really won't hurt, but already so much space has already been used. I agree also with the old Press Brown's space, that what a beautiful, wonderful prime retail space that could be in. And now as you're strolling through town, what you see is, you know, a place that's for, you know, meetings and a post office that is not adding to the fabric of our downtown. So my concerns are that, you know, I've grown up here. I would love to see Lexington be, you know, successful. I think Lexington, in the long time I've lived here since a little girl, it has, you know, changed and things like that, but I think it's always been a lovely place. But these are very concerning issues, I think, with Washington Lee taking over spaces that could be used for other businesses, which does have a tax effect, not necessarily as far as property taxes, but in other business licenses, sales tax, et cetera. And I put those notes in there too. So I won't take up any further of your time, but I would urge you to not approve the cup. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the public who would like to make comment at this time? I invite you to come on up. Your voices are important to us to hear. Okay, so seeing that there is no further member of the public who is interested in making a comment at this time, I'll close public comment and open up the commission discussion and decision portion. I do have, Arnie, I wonder, and if you could just speak to WNL, I believe WNL is not forbidden from owning further property downtown. It's an agreement, or it's sort of not even an agreement, probably. It's just sort of a what?
I'm not aware of any agreement. I think they have perhaps understood our comp plan direction that any new construction be on the main campus. I'm gonna use the word main campus, even though it wasn't specifically in there. There's nothing that I'm aware of legally that prohibits them from buying properties downtown. And
Right.
sometimes they're put in the awkward position of being given a property that is in downtown, even though they haven't requested that property. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you.
That
So
was the whole point of the first discussion when the city manager brought up the pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes, is that we have this relationship with WNL and that's how they compensate to make sure that we are getting property tax. There's no prohibition against them other than the statement in our comprehensive plan.
right, and I just wanted to make that clear to everybody here. And very interesting to hear that there's a parking committee that's going to form. I hope you all include the police in your, since they're the ones who and maybe the town manager. Okay, so comments from commission about this. We've heard about lots of concerns about parking, further concern about the extension of Washington and Lee into downtown. Talked about the actual building. Does anybody who would like to make comments?
I have a couple of comments. For example, we have been focusing on housing here, and to me, a better use for that space, and I'm don't suggest that I would even go as far as offering that, but I think that could definitely be a part of the solution, would be to instead of all of those offices, to have some of them for housing, because there's such a need. And since there already was housing up there before, that keeps the people in Lexington. You know, they don't necessarily leave downtown when the workday's over. So that was one item. And then the other item was with all of this space, other than what's on the main level, in the Rockbridge building for now, we'll just address that. The citizens of Lexington and visitors can definitely shop there, but they don't necessarily have access to some of those other places to rent if it's made just for WNL. So those are my thoughts. Being a little exclusive is what it seems to me.
It's kind of part of ownership of a building. I mean, when you buy a building, you get to decide how you're going to use it. And in this case, Mr. Adamson's buying the building. But I was on the Main Street Lexington board for a number of years. And one of the things we were focused on is getting those upper spaces used in some way. And we were in favor of using it for housing and for office space, however it could be used. And what we found out was that we contacted literally every owner of of downtown, and a lot of them that don't already have their spaces developed up to stairs were not interested in developing it, that they didn't want to put in that much money, that kind of investment in those properties. It takes a lot of investment to fix up those old buildings, and they were happy being able to just rent the main floor. So personally, I'm thrilled when anybody comes in and is willing to do a major renovation of those buildings, still keep the historic nature of it, but make them better utilized. And so I see that as a benefit. And I've seen Mr. Adamson's other work, and he does very good work. He is not a proxy for WNL. He has a number of different clients. Lewis Gale's one of his clients. His building, the former Beers building, is full of different types of businesses. There's can't see Lexington may rent some space in the BB&T, former BB&T building out on Nelson Street. So he doesn't just do WNL. He's not a proxy, but he does do very nice work. And as far as you had some concerns with the assembly space and making it exclusive because you require insurance. I mean, I work at a church and we require insurance coverage for any group outside of St. Patrick's to rent a space. I've rented space at VMI. They do the same. I mean, that's just general policy. It's not meant to exclude anyone. It's to protect the owner of the building from any kind of liability. And as far as it taking up, keeping other people from using those spaces, I mentioned it at the first meeting that we discussed this at. We have available office space downtown, and I am very concerned that we're going to have a lot of available office space when Department of Social Services moves out of downtown in a year and a half. And even when the city of Lexington, when we're done using our temporary space, there is more additional space there. As far as the parking goes, I mean, I think Arnie's covered that pretty well as far as that is a city issue, but we do have the parking passes. We do have some ways of controlling parking. I did speak with an administrator at the Press Brown building, which is leased by WNL, and he told me that everybody has been told in that building to park on WNL campus or in WNL parking lots, not to apply for a city pass and not to park in the streets. If you do park in the streets, you do have to move your car every 2 hours. So it's really not convenient to park in the streets. And in this case, the corral lots are a block from the Rockbridge building. So I do think they have available parking. It's not far from the city parking garage.
Is that the one behind Domino's?
The corral is the one right by Hardin's, I always think of the main parking lot, right on the corner.
Yeah. Okay.
Washington
Yep.
and
I
Lee.
gotcha.
Yeah, right. And in this project's not going to cause a net increase in the number of cars downtown or in Lexington, because all these people are already working downtown instead of now, like Mr. Adamson said, they'll park in a WNL lot instead of walking one direction into WNL and stay on WNL property. They'll now walk into town and hopefully create and generate more foot traffic for our businesses downtown. I was talking to a business owner today downtown and asking what he thought about it. And he was like, parking's not a problem. He said, I'm not worried about parking. If people want to get here, they get here. What I need is foot traffic so that people know that I'm here and they stop here. And that's having more people working downtown. I don't care who they are, but getting people down there is going to create that kind of foot traffic. So I think that is good for Lexington. And to one of the points made, WNL can put a lot of this on their property. What we have to look at, or maybe it's more of a city council issue, is what's best for Lexington. Is this a good thing for Lexington to be able to get more people, more of our spaces downtown filled, to get these old buildings renovated, and to create more foot traffic for our existing businesses? I mean, and to create those two pretty retail spaces. I think it's a win for Lexington.
Thank you, Leslie. Anybody else?
Well, I thought it might be useful for us to, since we have to decide based on the conditions of issuance, to work through them one by one.
Yep. I was thinking the same thing.
Because then, we can, because I have my notes. I went over them today and I think it might be a good way to organize the discussion.
So, but before we do that, if anybody else has comments that they just want to get out before we start going down the list.
Well, on the list, is there any time constraint for does it expire?
Does what expire?
The CUP.
The CUP,
Does it
we
have to be
can make it can have a leash on it.
Okay.
To use that word again. So it can have, like, we did a 15-year CUP for the courthouse.
Mhm.
So we could do that if it felt like that was an appropriate thing to do.
But our policy has been, when we did the 2017 code update, we took out end dates on CUPs. We used to have CUPs renew every 5 years, and we saw that became unnecessary. And so we made a policy that we don't put dates on them. We did for the last one, but just to be clear that's right now the only one that has an end date.
Right. And the downside of having the end date is that somebody has to remember that there's an end date. The upside to an end date is, of course, you can revisit it. If somebody does remember, it can be revisited instead of having it be in perpetuity. So there, it's both sides.
And since this is kind of new, if somebody doesn't use their CUP for 2 years,
Yeah.
then they lose it. So if WNL were to move out, somebody else moves in there for 2 years, they would have to go through this whole process again to be able to use that space or any other institution.
If there's plenty of office space, isn't this just going to be another place where there's too much office space? It's like because you said Social Security is going to be moving out, so that's potentially going to be just an open space. Are we just creating too much office space?
You mean with this building?
We don't know what, if we have too much office space, maybe whoever owns the wooded building will repurpose it for something else. I mean, that's kind of how the downtown, it's been interesting living here. I've only been here 24 years and people have been here longer, have seen it. I mean, our downtown is just transformed on its own based on what is needed. I don't want to get off topic, but the launch Lex, when Main Street ran that, we got different businesses to pitch their ideas and we helped launch new businesses. I just thought their vision of downtown was very different than how downtown was before. It was more experiential and catering to people doing things. I mean, that's just what we want. We want our downtown to keep developing in different ways and working for what people want it now. So while we are planners, I don't think we should try to say in this building it'll be housing and this building it'll be commercial. We'll let it work out, and it works out pretty well.
But not without effort.
Not without effort. I mean, we have guidelines. I mean, we have our policy,
Exactly.
our zoning in place, and that's why we have our zoning, but we're not dictating what every single building should be.
Right. Yeah. And that I can confirm that from much further back than that, there has been an ebb and flow, and it's related to all sorts of things, including what was going on WNL. The advent of Walmart changed everything downtown.
Mhm.
And there was a slump time, and lots of businesses closed and lots of law offices and things came in. So it is, and then the Main Street Lexington program started, and that really helped bring it back. But that's a lot of effort. So
Right. I was mostly just is there going to be too much, and then it's going to create a different problem, right? Like
it'll self-correct.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
And also we can't tell people what to do.
Oh yeah,
if they're property. Okay, so let's go down the conditions of issuance of a conditional use permit. So the first item is the proposed use will not affect adversely the health or safety of persons residing or working in the neighborhood of the proposed use. So I want to say this is just adversely affect the health or safety. So is anybody concerned on commission about not commission? Yes, commission. Oh boy. About the health or safety of people residing or working in the neighborhood because of this proposed use.
No, I agree with the staff.
Okay. All right, moving on to part B. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the public welfare or unduly injurious to property values or improvements in the neighborhood. Staff, I'll just read this. Staff believes that neither the requested educational facility, college, university use, nor the public assembly use will be detrimental to the public welfare or unduly injurious to to property values or improvements in the neighborhood. Anybody have any concerns about that one?
No, and I would note what's been said in public comments, and that the upgrading of the building to meet current fire and safety codes is a significant benefit
Yes, definitely.
to the downtown.
Anybody else? Okay, so we're good on A, we're good on B. Item C, the proposed use will not be in conflict with the policies and principles of the city's adopted comp plan. Staff believes it is not. Comments?
This is where I disagree with the staff
I also
recommendation.
disagree.
And no surprise here that you all I would say something about this. On the first strategy, that we have land use 2.3, encourage WNL to program new construction within present university boundaries. So Arnie gave a very good presentation on our last meeting. We had a little debate about whether that strategy, do you pay attention to the letter of the sentence as in new construction or the intent? And I would say, given the history of WNL statements over the growth issue, the town gown issue, I would interpret that as the intent is about expansion into the downtown. We can have a nuanced discussion about if a total renovation of a building is in effect a new construction, but that I don't think is necessary. So I did this during the review of the Washington and Lee master plan, and we had a very good discussion back and forth over several meetings with WNL, which in the end of the day, I think it was one of those discussions or the final agreement in the approval process was not everybody was happy, but not everybody was unhappy. And part of it was around this tension of expansion on Lee Avenue, parking garage, and everything on the east side. But I just wanted to highlight some history because they're lost in minutes. So in 2003, the Planning Commission minutes regarded the Lenfest Center. WNL noted that their focus at the present does not include purchasing any homes or other structures in the vicinity of this proposal or in the city. So there's a history here in terms of WNL saying, we understand the concerns will stay on campus. 2007, in the Lexington Comprehensive Plan, the objective was to strongly encourage WNL to program new construction within the present boundary and preclude any further loss of local businesses and industry, as well as the loss of limited taxable land. So some of that has been talked about. I think the taxable land issue is not on the table anymore. In 2007, in presenting the campus plan, there was a very good statement that said, we'll work with the community to improve the vitality and economic health of surrounding neighborhoods by defining the campus boundary in a way that welcomes interaction with its neighbors. And then I've already said what happened with the recent plan. So I would say that the intent is that WNL is not going to expand into the downtown through those statements. And now we're finding that this is another way, in a way we have an institutional overlay, and then all of a sudden we're jumping over Lee Avenue into the downtown with a series of conditional use permits. So that's one of my concerns and why I say we're not living up to the comprehensive plan. And then we had another strategy in the comprehensive plan, which was continue regular communication coordination to maintain Lexington's engagement and the physical and programmatic additions of both WNL and VMI. And again, I think we've all in this room failed at this one. We haven't had those discussions. I mean, when the mailroom, where the mailroom was, the building was taken down at WNL, why didn't we all scratch our head and say, where are you going to end up? I think the idea was you'd end up on campus somewhere. At least I did. I never thought it would be in the downtown. So I'd say we haven't been doing this review. And again, I'll say something I've said over and over again, that I know there's probably been discussions, but they haven't been regular discussions presented to council or the commission regarding these programmatic academic programs or administrative programs coming into the downtown. So sorry to be long-winded, but those were 2 points on the comprehensive plan that I wanted to point out.
Thank you so much. I think that those are very fair points and concerns. Does anybody have any comments about what John's pointed out?
I'll make a comment if nobody else will, but I do agree that this is the point. This is the main point for us to look at is, does it meet our comprehensive plan? You and I were both on the planning commission when we went through the comprehensive plan. I think we chose our wording very specifically. And to me, the main part in our comprehensive plan is on page 82, where it says, not only would additional expansion further erode the city's tax base, and we've already discussed that, removal of viable commercial activities from already limited downtown is harmful to the health and vigor of this vital commercial district. And to me, I think that's what we have to look at is WNL through this, are they displacing any downtown businesses or activities, either physically or competitively with this move? And to me, that's the key. Do we think there would be something better? This would have happened otherwise. And so that goes back to the point I made before is one, that we have other office space downtown. That in fact, we had that one CUP on Randolph Street where we allowed them to not use the downstairs as a commercial space, but they could instead put a bedroom down there, right? And using one of the frontage, which I was against that because I think we should preserve our commercial space in the downtown. But anyway, the basis of that decision was because we have plenty of commercial space downtown. And I don't see them competing with other businesses. I think that for the retail businesses and the restaurants, they'll be bringing in foot traffic, which is great. And what I hear from not all, but most of the downtown business owners that they like. And again, they're not competing for the space because we have other office space.
Thank you.
My thinking has evolved on this in this debate that we've been having. I'm not quite sure why this is going to surprise people from me, but there is value in WNL being more connected to the downtown in terms of students coming into the downtown and being part of it. We're unusual in that way. I spent more than 20 years in a university town, and there was much more integration of the university and the commercial area in terms of people coming and going. So, I mean, you barely see a student from WNL downtown, that's an exaggeration, but there aren't as many as I thought I would see walking around and using the facilities. So bringing students into the downtown to me is not necessarily is a good thing. And it goes back to the other debate we're having, or the discussion we need to address, is whether or not we're going to remove the assembly area or leave it in. Because that to me is one that brings in people. But that's a separate discussion. I think I'm a planner. I was brought up with it. I've worked with really good people over the years. The challenge I'm having with this, and I've talked to a lot of people about it, and everyone is this is a difficult decision. To approach this as a conditional use permit, and then we might have, John might buy another old building, and WNL might give him another long-term lease to put in a whole bunch of people there. And so then we're dealing with this as a commercial, conditional use permit. We have to answer to that particular permit. Then we get another one, and then we get another one. And so we're not really planning. We're enforcing code. We're not saying what is good for the downtown. How should WNL and Lexington coexist in the downtown? As Leslie says, what's good for Lexington and that? So we haven't had that discussion. And I think we need it. And I'll just say one more thing about that. And, you know, when I saw the Exhibit 3, and I thank the city manager for giving it to us, policy statement on taxes and services charged paid to the city of Lexington. And my thought is, well, why can't we have a policy statement on where the university and the city meet in the transition and engagement zones? Why can't we have that agreement in place with WNL? You know, about how we're going to coexist in the downtown and the peripheral, in the neighborhood surrounding you. Sorry, off my soapbox.
I'm curious, do you have so given that we are currently dealing with the CUP in front of us, an active request, how do you propose moving forward? I mean, planning is proactive, and right now we're being reactive to a request. So are you suggesting that we put this on hold until we can plan?
No, I think we have to act on this one as it's before us.
Yes.
And in fairness to the applicant.
Yeah.
And I'm bringing these issues up because we keep kicking that can down the road instead of saying, what could we really proactively do? So I say it's my soapbox. It's because I think it's something that we've been missing in our discussions on the downtown. But I think we should continue on this one and vote tonight on it.
Okay. All right. I think we have to do that, right? We can't kick this can down the road indefinitely. Okay. Are there any other thoughts, comments, concerns about item C?
The one little point that I could possibly make would be as far as the city's comprehensive plan. Yes, we are very happy to have WNL and VMI as neighbors, but it seems as though the downtown deserves to be its own entity and not be dependent on WNL. We have a lot of tourists that come through, and but even the residents of Lexington and or Rockbridge County deserve to have the opportunity to have either to have a business there or to have access to the facility, and that part does concern me.
Leslie, did you?
Just not spend too much time responding, but it was mentioned at the first meeting that for the Main Street building, or the old courthouse building at 2 Main Street, the city went out for requests for proposals, and there was one response to it, and it was the Adamsons to renovate that building to use for office space. I mean, in the Press Brown building, was literally the worst building in town and has been vacant for 15 years. Main Street kept working repeatedly with them to try to get them to develop it. They had no interest in doing anything. They finally did sell it to somebody, one person locally, and then a couple other people weren't local. They made minor improvements to it and kind of got to a stopping point. It was more than what they could do. And that's when I believe Mr. Adamson bought it from them. It is good to have these kind of people making investments, but we do have opportunities for people to buy buildings and make renovations, but not everybody takes advantage of that. I mean, I think everybody's getting a fair shake at it. It's just not happening. People don't all have the same resources or vision or whatever it takes.
That's a good example that if on the Press Brown building, because it did sit vacant and for years and years and years. And but if we had this discussion that I'm talking about, or some design guidelines or principles where we would say, well, Press Brown, fine, put your mailroom there, but the frontage should be an active space. You know, somehow how that, let's come to a basic agreement on that in the future. So that's what I mean about having this discussion rather than doing it building by building, and also in this case and Press Brown after the fact, really.
Though our process, I do agree with you on Press Brown. It would have been nice to have that discussion, just to have the discussion. I don't know that would have turned out any differently, but we already know why we didn't have that. That was
No, I'm saying in the
illegal.
future, Leslie.
But you're
you
right.
had
But our
guidelines.
process itself is through the CUP process. I mean, at the master plan, the final, and I didn't participate, so I don't remember exactly everything, but I did read over the cover letter to it. I mean, some of the things the city council and planning commission kicked back to W&L saying we need more information, do this through the CUP process, because that is our city process. And that is what our process is for this. We do just take them case by case. That does not mean that the city is not having discussions with W&L about this and all kinds of topics. There are lots of conversations, and you're right. There's probably room for more conversations on that. I do agree with that. But I think, like you said, right now, this is our process and we have to work through.
Yeah, no, this is the one we're working on. On the master plan did the way that the planning commission did that and council did it also offered a way that you could have a little tug back and forth and come to a good resolution. And I would say because it's a master plan, which is much larger than a single building, then we're dealing with the scale is different. But anyway, that's
Okay.
sorry, Chair, you're doing a great job.
So it sounds like, are we played out on item C then? Moving on to item D, adequate public services, including streets and other traffic ways, utilities, police, and fire protection are or reasonably will be available to support the proposed use. Does anybody have any concerns about that item? Looks like no. Okay, so the only issue that anybody has concerns about is item C. And I did not say this, but I throw my hat in with John. I am also concerned about the way that we're going about this. And not sort of writ large, not this particular one, but the fact that we're having to do these one by one. I think it would help us to. I think that it would help the city and it would help city relationship with W&L and have a forum where we can have some conversations about how to address these issues going forward. So that's something that we can maybe take up. Maybe city council takes it up. I'm not quite sure. But does anybody have any further questions, concerns, either for Arnie or within council? Okay, So we're going to have a roll call vote. Arnie, if you would explain what happens if we have a tie, just in case.
It's a recommendation that goes forward with really no recommendation. It's a split vote, so therefore it's a tie. We will make council aware that it is a tie. Your recommendation is really no recommendation, it's a tie vote.
Okay. All right.
Since yours is a recommendation, yours isn't the final. It would be different if it was the final vote and it would be no vote. In other words, it would be defeated, but you're making a recommendation, so that's not the case. We would make council aware of the minutes, your discussion, and what the vote is.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So who does the roll? Do I call the roll call vote?
First,
or-
we need a motion.
Yeah, we need
Yeah.
the motion.
Sorry.
And I,
Wait, we also have to address the issue of the
Assembly.
public assembly space.
not
So-
only that, but also it says that the storefronts facing Main Street are not subject to this conditional use permit. But
That means that they can't be used by W&L.
okay.
So does anybody have, I know Mary Stewart, you had some concerns about the public assembly space.
Well,
you still
if
con-
it just needs to be tweaked, so that, it's not exclusively for W&L. Is that worth putting in there? Or is this already in part of the?
Not there to begin with. So
okay,
I think we're
okay.
good on that. Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else have any thoughts about public assembly? Okay, so I think we're good with public assembly. We'll leave that in there for the vote. Okay, so I guess I'm waiting for a motion then.
I move to deny the conditional use permit CUP 2024-05 to allow portions of the Rockbridge building to be used for administrative facilities related to the educational facility, college, university use, and as a public assembly with those recommendations. Well, period. Period. And as a public assembly, period.
And do I have a second? And with no second, I believe that motion fails. So do I have another motion?
Sure. I move to approve conditional use permit number CUP 2024-05 to allow portions of the Rockbridge building tax map number 23-1-72A to be used for administrative facilities related to the educational facility, college/university use, and as a public assembly with the 3 staff recommended conditions.
And do I have a second on that one?
I'll second.
Okay, so who does the roll call vote? Would that be me
I
or
have it.
You do it. Yeah.
I do it? Great. Okay. Now I need my list. Sorry. There we go. Krista Anderson. You have to vote.
Mhm.
Sorry, just making sure.
It's okay. Can I abstain?
Nope.
Oh,
Not unless you have a conflict, you really can't.
okay, just a question. Aye. Approve, I guess.
Tori Bates,
Yes.
John Driscoll,
Reluctantly, yes.
Mary Stewart Harlow,
Nay.
Leslie Strawn,
Aye.
and myself, Shannon Spencer. I vote in favor. So the motion carries. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming. Thank you to the public. I think that what this conversation has has offered us all is the realization that we have some more conversations that we need to have. And I think it would be great to have you, Mr. Anderson, involved in those conversations, as well as WNL, the city. I think that, as well as members of the public, I think that we've got, there may be some further conversations that would be helpful for our community. So thank you so much, everyone.
I offer
Okay, yes, John,
just one short, I
of
promise.
course.
This was a difficult one,
No.
for lots of good reasons. One thing that I heard in the beginning, which surprised me and kind of helped change my mind, is that we are catching up with this conditional use permit. We're not being proactive with it. And I think that is our fault. I don't think it's fair to the owner. And if when Leslie, you brought up about WNL, we had that discussion before WNL did any work on any building. When someone, when we had the master plan discussion, when it was before.
They were already in 2 of John Adamson's buildings by then.
No. I'm speaking of the master plan process for WNL. We were proactively addressing their future growth. In this case, we are retroactively applying a conditional use permit for something that's already underway.
Yeah.
So I think that in the future should never happen again.
Thank you, John. Okay. Moving on to, wow. It is 7:10. Moving on to the annual zoning ordinance amendment to ZOA 2024-03, cottage housing. Welcome back, John. Okay, so we have run late. It was a good discussion. I suspect that everybody is probably about done. I know that there was some conversation about whether we would get to this. Might there be any thoughts on on whether we approach cottage housing tonight or not?
Can we pass on cottage housing tonight? You might have to remind me what it is at the next meeting. It's been a while.
I would agree that we should pass tonight. I don't think after this discussion, many of us have I know I don't have the bandwidth.
There we go. Yep. Do we need a motion and okay.
This isn't a public advertised public hearing, so no, you can just.
Okay, great. So we're gonna postpone that conversation until next time. And then going on to other business, do we have a zoning and planning report?
I do not.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we have, so the key, I probably say this every time now, the key annual PC milestones, but I think that perhaps one of those should be talking about this, the future of our conversations around WNL, and that might, maybe that's something to add. And is that a conversation you and I have? How do we?
When you get to that point, you can direct me to put it on an agenda for a discussion.
Okay.
And also direct me if you have an understanding or knowledge of what you want us to provide potentially for that discussion.
Okay. So how does one, under zoning text amendments, cottage housing, B, what else? Would this be under there? Would this be somewhere else?
It could be any place else that you want it. In other words, it's as simple as if you want to call me prior to the meeting, prior to the agenda and meeting packets going out, saying, please add a discussion item. And you can tell me exactly where to put it under what else or any place else, and we'll hold it there.
And that does not mean that we have to have a conversation about it every time, obviously.
I would think we would hold one as you direct us to, and then we'll see how we go forward with that.
Okay. All right. So we will we will pick that up at another time. Do we have a city council report?
Just a quick one. We sent out the RFQ, request for qualifications for the VDOT property on Friday, and the due date for responses is October 25th. So we'll see if we have any. It was a very general RFQ asking for any type of proposal. Right? That's all. I
Well,
have.
good luck. I hope you get lots of
I
it.
hope so too.
Okay.
Could commission get a copy of that?
Yeah, it
It's
might be
posted.
posted on the
Posted?
website.
Okay, yeah. I mean, because that in a way falls under the major project update.
Mm.
Okay, thank you.
It is available on the website.
Great. All right, here we are.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Thank you, everyone.
Well, that was a tough one for you two people that are new.
Where did I support?